Is expensive yarn really worth it? So, I have a skein of blue acrylic yarn here for maybe $3, $2.50, something like that. This is a skein of merino yarn for round about $8 Then I have a skein of indie dyed yarn, a nice colorway for $30 the skein, and here this would be a skein of cashmere, pure cashmere for $60. And one of my followers asked me, well, Norman, is it really worth it to splurge and buy expensive indie dyed yarn or luxury yarn or not? Let's find out. First of all, please only buy yarn you actually need, because the most expensive yarn is the one you never use. But with that out of the way, please consider the following. So this is a skein of standard merino yarn, and there is a reason why this is the most popular yarn on this planet. Not only among knitters, because that's actually a fairly small market, but among the big fashion brands. It's actually easy. Merino sheep have a high yield. They are easy to keep and care for. The yarn is actually incredibly soft, sometimes even as soft as the coarser qualities of cashmere or baby alpaca. But unlike those luxury fibers, the fleece has a lot of crimp, meaning the hairs are super curly, and it has a remarkable staple length. So if you spin it, it's super easy, and the resulting yarn is also very durable. Merino yarn is stretchy, breathable, comparably easy to wash and care for, and it takes dye remarkably well. And since it's a white yarn, there's no need to over dye it, and you can basically achieve any color on this planet with it. So if you put all these factors together, you will quickly come to the realization that sheep wool is one of the best, if not the best fiber for knitwear on this planet. And the reason why it's so cheap has to do with the fact that during the 18th and 19th century, basically what feels like half of this planet was turned into sheep pasture. So it started in the Scottish Highland with the Highland clearances, but it ended in Australia, and today Australia is the biggest producer of merino wool on this planet. The simple reason why cashmere, caveat, or the super expensive vicuña is more expensive than merino wool has to do with the fact that raising and keeping these animals is super expensive and sometimes even impossible, and you have to obtain the fiber from animals in the wild, and then you have to collect the sheddings or try to corral them together and then individually shear them or comb the undercoat from these shy wild animals. And then once you have the fiber, you need to manually sort them and then send the fiber to Italy, because only they have those super specialized machines, spinning machines, that can turn this into something knit-worthy. And that is what you pay for, but not necessarily a better quality. Maybe it's softer, but that doesn't mean it has a better quality. And now we can circle back to the initial question. What you get by buying expensive yarn such as this caveat yarn, where one skein might be $80, $90, $100, is not necessarily a better quality. Instead, you get a different quality. And this is where things get really, really important. If you have your standard sock yarn, such as this one, 80% merino, 20% nylon, acrylic, polyamide, you can basically knit everything with it. That's because it's just so versatile and durable. Sweaters, shawls, gloves, hats, and not only socks. And typically these yarns are spun very consistently, leading to wonderfully uniform stitches. If, on the other hand, you have cashmere yarn, silk, caveat, just like in this case, the range of patterns you can knit with it is a lot more limited. While this might be softer, it's just so incredibly soft. The fibers simply are not durable enough to knit, I don't know, socks with it or anything that experience more wear and tear. It will pill easily, the fibers will come apart. You may not be able to wash it very easily, or sometimes one could argue that washing it at all could be an issue. And then the stitch definition will also be a lot more varied, I guess, because these fibers, because they have so little crimp sometimes or such a short staple length, they need to be spun in very unique ways. So you definitely should not expect this mirror smooth stockinette stitch surface, but sometimes it can look more on the, well, as I often say, charmingly homemade side. So I totally think that expensive fibers can be totally worth it, but they are worth it if you are an experienced knitter with a super good stitch definition, who knows when and where and why to use a certain fiber and why not. Another thing you should definitely be aware of is the fact that a lot of indie dyed yarn is expensive for all the wrong reasons. So the difference between such a skein for $6 US, $7 US, I think it's €5 or something like that, and this skein for $30 US is not one in quality. Both are sheep wool, possibly from the exact same wholesaler. So the difference is the only difference is the color. And you have to decide for yourself if the experience and labor it takes to create a well-balanced colorway is something you want to pay extra for. And please, 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 don't expect, or not necessarily expect, a difference in fabric quality, especially since not all dyers were created equally, and some just know how to create beautiful skeins that knit up terribly. So no matter how beautiful this colorway and skein looks, I'd be very, very hesitant to buy sweater quantities of indie dyed yarn if you need to save a full year until you can afford it, because there is this very real risk that you will be disappointed, especially if you have no prior experience with the dyer and or you have no experience with knitting with colorways and how best to knit with them. Then this can be a total disappointment. You can spend $400 US for yarn, and the sweaters, well, there's a real risk this will look like clown barf. And then there is one last dimension. So the biggest difference between this skein of acrylic yarn, this skein of run-of-the-mill merino yarn, and this skein of single origin, locally sourced, locally spun, and locally sold black Hebridean sheep wool yarn boils down to ethics. This here is pure plastic, and by buying it, you support an industry that is actively harming our planet, from sourcing the oil to polluting our oceans with microplastic. This merino yarn was possibly shipped 3 times across the whole globe before it was destined to get a dust in your stash for 12 years. Now, of course, I can't make this choice for you, and everyone has different standards and, of course, a different budget. But if you ask me, the problem starts when you pick a cheap yarn with a dubious footprint to save some money so you can buy a bigger TV you actually don't really need, or you can go on a second vacation this year. Or what is also very common, people buy dead cheap cotton yarn where I can almost guarantee you that some form of slave or child labor is involved to do charity knitting. You know, I feel that just doesn't make any sense. And that is one of the main reasons why I try to shop locally as much as possible for my own private knitting. For me, the extra price is really worth it, and luckily I am in the position that I can afford it. To me, knitting is all about expressing my individuality. I don't want to knit the exact same item in the exact same yarn and in the exact same color as 200 other knitters are currently knitting in their mystery knit along. If I want conformity, I just can go to a store and save me the trouble. I also enjoy learning about new stitches, about new fibers, feeling new fibers between my fingers, achieving new textures, new color combinations. That is something that I feel is worth it for me. But ultimately, let's not get disillusional here. If it's just about knitting and fabric qualities, in 90% of all cases, using a 20% nylon and 80% merino yarn from one of the big manufacturers will be your best bet. Here, when it comes to Kiviat yarn or something like that, or indie dyed yarn, you are paying for rareness and or additional labor involved, but not necessarily higher quality. Sure, this is softer, maybe 30% softer than merino yarn, but the price is 3,000% higher. So you need to decide for yourself if that is something you can afford, of course, and if it's something that's worth it to you and you know how to use it. And if the answer is no to any of these three questions, then it's probably not a good idea to buy it. Anyway, let me know what you think and comment below. And if you have a knitting question I can answer in such a short little video, then please comment below as well. And as always, happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.